Hello, girls and boys. Quinn did everything right. Fell in love, got married, left clean when it stopped working. What she couldn't do was close one specific door. A snowstorm in Vermont finally made her stop trying. I'm Lena. This is that story.
The first thing you should know about me is that I said no. Twice. I said it clearly, over the phone, to a woman who has known me since I was 26 years old and has never once accepted my first answer on anything. My ex-mother-in-law, Nora Callahan. The woman who taught me how to make proper Irish coffee during a blizzard in 2019, who once drove 40 minutes in the wrong direction just to avoid a conversation with her own sister, and who, apparently, still had my number saved under Quinn Aunt Diane's wife, even though Diane and I had been divorced for a full year. She called to invite me to a farewell weekend at the family cabin in Vermont. A closure gathering, she called it. Her words, not mine. I remember laughing, which was rude, but the laugh came out before I could stop it, because the idea that a family could schedule closure on a calendar, with a start time and a cheese board, was the most Callahan thing I had ever heard. I said no the first time, because it was a reasonable answer. A sane answer. You don't go back to your ex-wife's family cabin. That is not something functioning adults do. I had a life in Portland now, a small apartment that smelled faintly of pine and old books, a job I actually liked, a running route along the river that had become the most peaceful part of my week. I was, by every reasonable measure, doing fine. Not great, but fine was something I had learned to respect. I said no the second time because Nora laughed at the first no. Not cruelly. That wasn't her style. She laughed the way she always laughed, low and a little tired, like she had already seen the end of the conversation and was waiting for me to catch up. Then she said, "Diane won't be there the whole weekend. She's coming Saturday morning and leaving Sunday afternoon. You could come Friday, drive up with the others." And something about the way she said it, the precision of it, the fact that she had clearly already mapped out the logistics of my potential comfort, made me pause just long enough to lose the argument. I said yes the third time, because I am, at my core, apparently still a person who cannot disappoint Nora Callahan. There is a version of this story where I pretend that was the only reason, where I tell you I went out of some vague sense of obligation, or because I wanted closure too, or because Vermont in November is genuinely beautiful if you can tolerate the cold. All of that would be partially true. But I have been trying, in the year since the divorce, to be more honest with myself about the things I don't want to look at directly. So I will tell you the truth. When Nora said my name at the end of that phone call, just Quinn, nothing attached to it, no explanation, I felt something shift in my chest that I had no clean language for. I had felt that before. I knew exactly when it had started. I packed a bag that Friday morning with the focused energy of someone who is definitely not overthinking anything. Wool sweater, extra socks. The novel I had been meaning to finish for 3 months, and would not finish on this trip either. I called my friend Sasha while I loaded the car, and she listened to the whole situation in silence, which is either her greatest quality or her most aggravating one depending on the day. When I finished, she said, "So, you're driving 4 hours to spend the weekend with your ex-wife's mother." I confirmed that yes, that was accurate. She said, "Okay. Just okay. No follow-up." I asked if she had anything else and she said, "I'm waiting to see how this ends." Then she hung up. The drive to Vermont was unremarkable until it wasn't. The sky had been threatening all afternoon. That particular shade of gray that people who grew up in New England learned to read like a second language. I had checked the forecast before leaving. Light snow, they said. Manageable, they said. I had driven in worse. What the forecast did not account for was the section of Route 9 where my phone lost signal entirely, where the light snow became something considerably less light, and where I turned a corner and found Nora's car pulled to the shoulder with the hazard lights on. A flat tire, and Nora herself standing beside it in a coat that was not warm enough for what the sky was currently doing. She saw my headlights before I even rolled down the window. And she did something I did not expect. She laughed. Standing in the snow, tire blown, temperature dropping, she just laughed and pointed at me like she had been waiting for exactly this to happen. I pulled over. I got out. The cold hit me immediately and thoroughly. Nora said, "I thought you said no." I said, "I changed my mind." She said, "Obviously." And we stood there for a moment in the thickening snow, looking at each other across the roof of her car. And I had the distinct and inconvenient feeling that the weekend was not going to go anything like I had planned. The spare was flat, too. Of course it was. Before we go any further, if you've ever fallen for someone you absolutely weren't supposed to, or if you've lived through a romance with a serious age gap and want to talk about what that actually feels like, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe. Quinn and Nora are just getting started. I need to back up. Because none of what happened in Vermont makes sense without the other thing first. The thing I have never told anyone, not even Sasha. Not even in the abstract way you tell your best friend things you're not ready to fully admit. The thing that started 3 years before the divorce, 4 years before that flat tire on Route 9, at a farmer's market in Portland on a Saturday morning when I was 26 years old and had nowhere particular to be. I was looking at honey. That is the unglamorous truth of it. There was a table with 17 varieties of honey, and I was reading the little handwritten labels with the focused attention of someone who had been single for 8 months and had redirected all that energy into grocery shopping. I was holding a jar of dark buckwheat honey when a woman beside me reached past me, not rudely, just efficiently, and picked up the one next to it. She looked at the label, put it back, picked up another. I watched her do this with the calm, methodical certainty of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and was simply locating it. She was wearing a gray coat, dark hair with silver running through it in a way that looked less like aging and more like intention. She had the kind of face that made you feel like she had already considered whatever you were about to say and found it mildly interesting. She caught me staring. She did not look away. She said, "The wildflower is better than it sounds, and worse than it looks." I said something back. I genuinely cannot remember what. Some variation of agreement, and she smiled, just slightly, and moved on to the next table. I stood there holding my buckwheat honey for what was probably an embarrassing amount of time. I bought it without tasting it. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes doing absolutely nothing. I did not think about her again until 6 weeks later, when Diane Callahan brought me home to meet her family. The dinner was at Nora's house, a narrow, book-crammed Victorian in northeast Portland that smelled like coffee and old wood. I remember Diane squeezing my hand on the front porch and saying her mother could be a lot, but meant well. I remember the door opening. I remember looking up. And I remember the exact moment Nora Callahan recognized me, at the same time I recognized her, and how neither of us said a word about it, and how the silence of that decision settled between us like something we had agreed to without negotiating. "Quinn," Diane said, "this is my mom." Nora extended her hand, steady, warm, completely composed. "Nice to meet you," she said. And she looked at me with those same calm eyes from the farmer's market, and I shook her hand. And I thought, this is fine. This is nothing. This is a coincidence and nothing more. People run into each other in Portland. It's a small city dressed up as a big one. This did not mean anything. I told myself that for 4 years. I got good at it, the way you get good at anything you practice consistently. I learned the rhythms of family dinners, the Callahan humor, dry, self-aware, allergic to sentimentality. I learned that Nora took her coffee black and read 2 books at a time and had strong opinions about architecture and almost no opinions about television. I learned that she listened differently than most people, not waiting for her turn, but actually absorbing what you said, filing it somewhere, bringing it back weeks later in a different context that made you feel seen in a way that was slightly uncomfortable. I learned to sit across the table from her and hold a normal conversation and feel absolutely nothing visible on my face. What I did not learn was how to stop noticing her. The way she moved through a room, not performing, just present. The way she laughed at things other people missed. The way she looked at Diane sometimes with this complicated mix of pride and worry that only a parent can produce. And the way she looked at me sometimes, briefly, carefully, like she was reading something she wasn't sure she should be reading. There was a Christmas, the second year, when everyone else had moved to the living room and Nora and I were finishing the dishes. She washed, I dried. We talked about nothing, a book she'd recommended, a project she was working on. And at some point the conversation just stopped, not awkwardly, just completely, and we stood there in the quiet kitchen with the sound of the family in the next room, and she handed me a glass without looking at me, and our fingers overlapped for a half-second, and she said very quietly, "You're good for her, Quinn." And I said thank you. And I put the glass away, and I did not sleep well for a week. I married Diane 8 months later. I want to be careful here. Diane is not a villain in this story, and she deserves better than to be flattened into a plot device. She was warm and funny and genuinely good. She loved me in the way some people love, fully, confidently, without much doubt. The doubt was mine. It lived in a quiet corner I had learned to decorate around, to furnish with routine and affection, and the reasonable architecture of a life that looked, from the outside, exactly right. The divorce was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was gentle. Two people who had stopped surprising each other deciding, with great civility, to stop pretending that was enough. Diane cried once, briefly, and then made tea, and that was very Diane. I drove home alone and sat in my empty apartment and felt something I could not name. Not relief exactly, and not grief exactly. More like a door closing on a room I had never quite moved into. I thought about Nora twice that night. I told myself it meant nothing. By then, I almost believed it. Before we get into what happened next, and trust me, you want to know what happened next, I just want to say something quickly. If you've been enjoying Quinn and Nora's story and want more like this, I have a Patreon. The link is right below this video. The stories there are longer, more detailed, the kind of versions I can't quite fit into this channel. Okay, back to Vermont. The snow was not playing around. By the time I had pulled fully onto the shoulder behind Nora's car, what the forecast had called light accumulation had reclassified itself into something considerably more serious. The flakes were the heavy, wet kind, the kind that stick immediately and mean business. And the wind had picked up enough that I had to hold my jacket closed with one hand while I walked around to assess the tire situation. Nora was already crouching beside it with her phone flashlight, which told me she had been there long enough to move from panic to pragmatism, which meant she had been there a while. "How long have you been stopped?" I asked. 20 minutes, maybe. She stood up, brushed snow off her knee. AAA says 45 to 60, which means 90. The spare? Also flat. She said it without self-pity, just information. I know. I looked down the road in both directions. Empty in both. The trees on either side had already gone white, and the visibility was dropping fast. I pulled out my phone, 1 bar, flickering, and checked the weather app, which had updated its forecast to something that used the word advisory in a way that felt personally directed at me. I showed it to Nora. She looked at it, looked at the sky, looked back at me. "There's a town about 4 miles back," she said. "I passed a sign for it. Millhaven, I think." "You want to drive 4 miles back in this?" "I want to not stand on the side of a mountain road in this," she said. "Driving 4 miles back is the method, not the goal." That was so specifically Nora that I almost smiled. Almost. I was still working on maintaining the composure of a person who had not just driven 4 hours to spend a weekend with the woman she had spent 4 years pretending not to think about. I was doing a reasonable job of it. The snow was not helping. We transferred the essentials from her car to mine. Her overnight bag, a paper bag of groceries she had apparently stopped for on the way, and, for reasons she did not explain, a very good bottle of red wine. I did not ask about the wine. Some things you just accept. We got in. I pulled back onto the road, and for the first 3 minutes neither of us said anything. The wipers worked steadily. The heater made its particular sound. Outside, Vermont was becoming a snow globe. "You didn't have to stop," she said finally. "Your hazards were on." Other people drove past. "I'm not other people," I said, and then immediately felt the weight of that sentence and kept my eyes on the road. Nora was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "you're not." The town of Millhaven turned out to be 4 miles back, and approximately 100 years in the past. A main street with a hardware store, a diner with fogged-up windows, and a place called Birchwood Inn that had a hand-painted sign and a light on in the front room. We pulled into the lot as the snow thickened to the point where the tree line had become a suggestion. I called the cabin. Diane's Aunt Margaret picked up, informed me the pass road was already closed, told us not to be idiots and to find somewhere to stay, and hung up in the efficient way of a woman who had survived 17 Vermont winters and had no patience for people who acted surprised by the 18th. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. "Closed," I said. I heard. Nora was already looking at the inn. "Shall we?" The woman at the front desk, 50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, cardigan the color of a fire, told us they had 2 rooms. One had a heating issue. The other was the larger one at the end of the hall, with 2 beds, which was available because a couple had canceled that morning due to the weather. She said this with the mild, pleasant tone of someone delivering good news, which technically it was. I looked at Nora. Nora looked at me. "We'll take it," Nora said. The room was warm and smelled like cedar and old quilts and something faintly herbal I couldn't identify. 2 beds, a small table by the window, a lamp with a yellow shade that made everything look like a photograph from a different decade. Nora set her bag down on the far bed, took off her coat, and looked out the window at the snow coming down in the lamplight outside. I stood near the door for a moment, still in my jacket, watching her without meaning to. She turned around and caught me. She didn't say anything about it. "I'll open the wine," she said. "You find something on that television that isn't a car commercial." I took off my coat. I sat on the edge of my bed. I found a documentary about migratory birds, which Nora immediately said was fine, and we sat in that warm yellow room with a snowstorm pressing against the window and wine in paper cups from the bathroom, because neither of us had thought to bring glasses, and Nora made a comment about the birds that was quietly funny, and I laughed, and she looked at me when I laughed, just briefly, with an expression I had seen before and never let myself translate. I translated it now. I couldn't help it. I looked back at the television. The birds were flying south. Somewhere behind us, a road was closed. Somewhere ahead of us, a weekend we had both agreed to was no longer accessible. And we were here, in a room that smelled like cedar, with a bottle of wine and nowhere else to be. And I was 30 years old and she was 50, and none of that felt as large or as impossible as it had always seemed inside my head. I didn't say any of that. I watched the birds. I drank the wine. But I stopped pretending I didn't know what I was feeling. There is a photograph from my wedding that I have never deleted. Not because I look good in it. I do, actually. But that's not the reason. It lives in a folder on my phone that I never scroll to intentionally, but also never move to the trash, which is its own kind of answer. In the photo, Diane and I are at the reception, mid-laugh at something someone said, and behind us, slightly out of focus, Nora is standing at the edge of the dance floor with a glass of wine and an expression that I did not notice at the time because I was busy getting married. I noticed it 11 months later, sitting on my bathroom floor the week after the divorce was finalized, when I was going through photos for reasons I cannot fully defend. I looked at that expression for a long time. I still don't have clean language for it. It was not unhappy exactly. It was the face of someone watching something happen that they had already made peace with, which is a different and more complicated thing. The wedding was in May. A vineyard outside Portland, the kind of place that exists specifically to make people feel like their life is a magazine spread for one afternoon. Diane had planned most of it, which suited me. I had opinions about flowers and no opinions about centerpieces, and she had opinions about both, so we divided the labor naturally. Nora had helped with the venue, done the negotiating with the owner, drawn up a rough layout of the space with dimensions, because she was an architect and could not help herself. She handed me the layout over coffee 3 weeks before the wedding and said, "You don't have to use any of this. I just needed to do something useful, or I was going to lose my mind." I laughed and kept every suggestion. The ceremony was short and the food was good, and Diane cried during the vows in a way that made everyone else cry too, which is a talent I genuinely admired. I held her hands and said the words I had written and meant them. Not in the volcanic, all-consuming way of movies, but in the steady, honest way of someone who wanted the person in front of her to be happy, and believed she could contribute to that. I think that is what I felt. I have examined it from many angles since, and I keep arriving at the same answer, which is both clarifying and unkind. The moment I need to tell you about happened at the reception, after dinner, during the part of the evening when the formality dissolves and people start having the conversations they actually wanted to have. I had stepped away from the main tent to get air, heels, June heat, the accumulated performance of a day of being looked at. And I was standing near a stone wall at the edge of the property, shoes off, looking at the vineyard rows going dark in the evening light. I heard footsteps on the grass. I knew without turning who it was. Nora stood beside me. She had a glass of wine for herself and a glass of water for me, which she handed over without comment. We stood there for a moment in the particular quiet that exists at the edge of a loud event, the music and voices reaching us softened by distance. "Good day?" she asked. "Good day," I said. She nodded, looked at the vineyard. "She's happy." "I know. You did that." I turned to look at her then, because something in her voice had shifted slightly, a half step down from where it usually lived. She was looking straight ahead, the vineyard, the fading light, the neat dark rows, her profile in the evening, the line of her jaw, the silver in her hair catching the last of the sun, was the kind of thing a person could spend a long time looking at if they were not careful. "Nora," I said, not asking anything, just her name. She turned. We were closer than I had registered, the stone wall on one side, the noise of the party on the other, the evening pressing in. She looked at me with that expression I could not translate, and would spend the next 4 years trying to file under something harmless. Her eyes moved to my face, and stayed there for 2 full seconds, which is a long time when you are counting. Then Diane's cousin called my name from the tent opening, loud and cheerful, waving me back in for the first dance. Nora looked away first. She took a small sip of wine. "Go," she said. "She's looking for you." I went. I danced. I smiled at my wife across the floor and she smiled back with her whole face, and I was glad, genuinely, completely glad, that she was happy. I told myself the thing by the stone wall was nothing. A moment. The particular emotional pressure of a wedding, which makes everyone feel things slightly larger than they are. I found the photograph 4 years later and understood that we had both been lying to ourselves at the same stone wall on the same May evening, in the same careful, practiced way, for reasons that were different, and arrived at the same place. The reception went late. Nora left before midnight. She hugged Diane first, long and close, said something in her ear that made Diane laugh. Then she turned to me. She put both hands on my shoulders, looked at me directly and said, "Take care of her." Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between, weighted with a meaning I chose not to examine. "I will," I said. She nodded once. Let go. Walked to her car. I watched her taillights disappear down the vineyard road, and then went back inside to my wedding. For the rest of the night I danced and laughed and drank good wine and was, by all visible evidence, a happy bride. And I was. That is the truth, and I am keeping it. But there is another truth beside it, smaller and more stubborn, that I had been carrying since a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. That some feelings do not dissolve just because you decide not to act on them. They just learn to be quiet. They learn to wait. They are very patient, those kinds of feelings. I had no idea how patient until Vermont. The documentary about migratory birds ended, and neither of us moved to turn off the television. That is the thing about snowstorms. They create a specific kind of permission. The world outside has made the decision for you, closed the roads, canceled the plans, removed every reasonable excuse to be anywhere else, and what's left is just the room and whoever is in it with you. Nora had refilled both cups. The wine was good, better than paper cups deserved. And the snow against the window had gone from threatening to almost beautiful now that we were no longer standing in it. A cooking show came on after the birds. Neither of us was watching it. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said. She was sitting on her bed with her back against the headboard, legs stretched out, still in her clothes. She had taken off her boots and her socks, which for some reason made her seem more herself than I had ever seen her. Not the composed architecture drawing Sunday dinner hosting version, but just a person in a room in the middle of an unexpected night. "You can try," I said. She smiled at that, the small one. "How are you, actually?" "We did this on the phone when you invited me." "You said fine on the phone. I'm asking again." I looked at the television. Someone was making pasta with the focused joy of a person who had never been through a divorce. "I'm better than I was 6 months ago," I said, which is a real answer, even if it sounds like a non-answer. "It sounds like progress," she said, "which is different." I pulled my knees up, wrapped my arms around them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and the room felt smaller and warmer for it. "I think I'm figuring out who I am when I'm not half of something," I said. Which sounds like a thing people say in therapy, but it's actually just true. I spent 4 years being Quinn and Diane, and now I'm just Quinn, and I keep catching myself in the middle of ordinary moments thinking, "Oh, this is actually mine. This feeling, this preference, this version of a Tuesday. Mine." Nora was quiet for a moment. "That's not a small thing," she said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." The cooking show murmured between us. The pasta was finished. Someone was plating it with the careful attention of a person who understood that presentation is its own form of honesty. "Diane told me you were the one who ended it," Nora said. Not accusatory, just fact establishing, the way she approached most things. "She told you that?" "She tells me most things, eventually." A pause. "She said you were kind about it, that you didn't make her feel like she had done something wrong." "She hadn't." "I know." Nora looked at her cup. "That's what made it hard for her. People find it easier to be left for a reason." I had not thought about it that way. I sat with it for a moment, the accuracy of it settling uncomfortably. "I didn't know how to explain it to her," I said carefully. "I still don't entirely know how to explain it to myself." "Try," Nora said. "Just that. Try." There was something about the room, The yellow lamp, the snow, the paper cups, the lateness of the hour, that made the usual defenses feel like too much effort, like wearing a coat indoors. I had been carrying a rehearsed version of this explanation for a year, the one I gave people who asked, the one that was true but not complete. What came out instead was something I had not planned. "I think I married the life," I said. "The dinners and the house and the feeling of being chosen by someone good. I think I loved Diane the way you love a place that makes you feel safe. And I know that sounds like I'm making it smaller than it was, but I'm not. Safety is not a small thing. It just turned out it wasn't enough, and I couldn't keep pretending it was without doing something worse to both of us." Nora did not respond immediately. She had that quality, the listening quality, where the silence after you spoke didn't feel like absence but like absorption, like she was actually taking in what you said instead of preparing her answer. "That took courage," she said finally. "Leaving something that looked right from the outside. It took 18 months of pretending first." "That's usually how courage works," she said. "It comes after the pretending runs out." I looked at her then, really looked, the way I had trained myself not to for years. She was 50 years old, and she was tired from the drive and the cold and the unexpected night, and she was the most grounded person I had ever been in a room with, and I was 30, and I had driven 4 hours toward a weekend I told myself I didn't want, and I was sitting 12 feet away from the truest answer to a question I had never let myself finish asking. "Why did you really invite me?" I said. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Because Diane would have been fine either way," she said, "and I wasn't sure you would be." The cooking show ended. The television moved to something with a laugh track that neither of us acknowledged. The snow was still coming down outside, steady and indifferent, and the room was warm and smelled like cedar, and the wine was almost gone, and Nora Callahan had just told me, in the most careful and deniable way possible, that she had been thinking about me. I picked up the wine bottle. There was enough for one more pour each. I divided it evenly, which felt like its own kind of answer, and handed her cup back across the space between the beds. And our eyes met over the paper cups and the quiet television and the whole accumulated weight of 3 years of dinners and a wedding and a divorce and a farmer's market on a Saturday morning. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to yet. But the thing that had been quiet for so long had stopped being quiet, and we both knew it. And the night was just getting started. The day I signed the divorce papers, Nora showed up at my apartment with food. I want to be precise about this because the details matter. It was a Tuesday, it was raining. I had been sitting on my kitchen floor for approximately 40 minutes, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the floor felt like the right altitude for how I was feeling. The papers were on the counter. Signed, witnessed, done. Diane had already sent a text that said, "Take care of yourself with a small blue heart," which was so Diane, warm and final and leaving no room for ambiguity, that I had put the phone face down and migrated to the floor. The knock came around 7. I almost didn't answer it. I was in sweatpants and the particular emotional state that prefers to be horizontal, and I had not told anyone what day it was because I did not want to perform being okay, or perform not being okay, both of which are exhausting in different ways. But something, some instinct, some frequency, made me get up. I opened the door and Nora was standing in the hallway in a rain jacket with a grocery bag in each arm, and an expression that said she was not there to make me talk about anything. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. She was not in the neighborhood. She lived 40 minutes away. I stepped back from the door. She came in, went directly to the kitchen with the ease of someone who had been there before, which she had twice for dinners early in the marriage, and began unpacking the bags onto the counter with quiet efficiency. Soup. Real soup, the kind in a container from the good deli on Burnside, not a can. Bread. A bar of dark chocolate that she set to one side like punctuation. She filled the kettle without asking where anything was, which meant she had paid attention on those previous visits to the kind of detail most people don't bother with. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around my kitchen, and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was clenched. She did not ask how I was. She did not say she was sorry. She did not tell me it was going to be okay, or that I was brave, or that Diane and I would always be important to each other, all of which were things other people had said, and which sat on me like furniture in the wrong room. She heated the soup. She made tea. She cut the bread. She put a bowl in front of me and sat down across the table and said, "There's a documentary about brutalist architecture on streaming that I have been telling people about for 2 months, and no one will watch with me." I said, "I'll watch it." She said, "Good." We watched it on my laptop at the kitchen table, bowls between us, tea going cold. The documentary was genuinely interesting. Nora made comments throughout, quiet and specific, the kind that told you she knew the subject from the inside. I asked questions. She answered them without condescension, which is rarer than it should be. At some point I started actually eating, which I had not done much of that day, and at some other point the soup was gone and the bread was mostly gone, and the documentary had moved to a segment about a housing complex in London that Nora had actually visited, and she described it with a precision that made me feel like I was standing inside it. We did not talk about the divorce. We did not talk about Diane. We did not talk about what came next, or what I was feeling, or any of the architecture of the situation I was in. We talked about buildings. We talked about the way certain structures age, how some things designed to last become beautiful through use, and some become sad through it, and how you can rarely predict which way it will go at the time of construction. At some point I realized we had been talking for 2 hours and the rain had stopped and it was nearly 10 o'clock. Nora looked at the time and began gathering her things with the same quiet efficiency she had arrived with. Jacket, keys, the chocolate bar, which she left on the table. At the door she stopped and turned around, and I was standing in the middle of my small kitchen in my sweatpants, and she looked at me for a moment with an expression I had filed under maternal concern for years, because that was the safest available folder. "You're going to be fine," she said, not consolation. Assessment. "You don't know that," I said. "I know you," she said. She left. I stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed, hand still on the knob, and thought about what it meant that her being there had felt more like home than the 4 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and a wedding and a shared house had managed to produce. I thought about it, and then I put it away, carefully, in the same place I put everything about Nora, the compartment I had built with such care and maintained with such diligence that I had almost convinced myself it wasn't there. Almost. What I did not know that Tuesday, standing in my hallway in the rain quiet of a newly ended marriage, was that Diane had not told Nora what day it was either. I found this out a year later, in Vermont, when I asked. Nora said she had looked at the calendar and done the math from what Diane had mentioned about the timeline, and when she arrived at the date she had gotten in her car and driven 40 minutes without fully deciding to. She said it the way she said most things. Plainly, without drama, like it was simply what had happened. I asked her why. She said, "Because I thought you might be on the floor." I stared at her. I was on the floor. She nodded, like this confirmed something she had already known. "I know. There are people in your life who see you at the resolution other people don't bother with. Who notice not just the large, readable emotions, but the smaller, more specific ones. The quality of your silence, the altitude of your feelings on a Tuesday night." I had known Nora was one of those people for years. What I had not let myself know was what it meant that she had been looking that closely. What it meant that I had been visible to her in that particular way, and that she had driven 40 minutes in the rain in response to it, and that I had opened the door and felt, for the first time all day, like I was allowed to stop performing. I ate the chocolate after she left. The whole bar, standing at the counter, and it was very good chocolate. And I thought about a farmer's market and a stone wall at a vineyard, and a woman who showed up when she wasn't asked and left the good chocolate on purpose. I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in months. I didn't examine why. Some truths you let yourself have in pieces. It was past midnight when she asked me. The television had been off for an hour. We had moved from wine to water without discussing it, the natural metabolism of a late night settling in. The lamp with the yellow shade was still on. Neither of us had reached for the switch. And it did that thing yellow light does in small rooms. Made everything feel closer and warmer and slightly outside of ordinary time. Nora was still on her bed. I was still on mine. The distance between us was maybe 8 feet, and also, depending on how you measured, approximately 4 years. "Can I ask you something I have no right to ask?" she said. I had been looking at the ceiling. I turned my head toward her. "That's a specific kind of preamble." "I know." She was looking at the ceiling too. "I'm leaving it there anyway." I waited. "Why did you come this weekend?" She paused. "Not the version you told yourself on the drive up. The actual reason." The room was very quiet. Outside, the snow had slowed to something gentle, and the wind had dropped, and Millhaven at 1 a.m. had the particular silence of a small town that has made its peace with winter. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear hers. "I've been thinking about that for 4 hours," I said. And I keep arriving at an answer I'm not sure I'm ready to say out loud." She turned her head. I turned mine. We were looking at each other across the 8 feet and the 4 years and the yellow lamp and the whole complicated geography of what we were to each other, which had never had a clean name and had always had a weight. "Quinn," she said. "Just my name." The same way she'd said it on the phone, attached to nothing, explaining nothing, carrying everything. "I came because you asked me to," I said. "And I have never been able to not respond to you, in any context, for as long as I've known you, and I have spent a significant amount of time and energy trying to figure out what to do with that. And the honest answer is that I never figured it out. I just got better at not looking at it directly." She was quiet. Her eyes were still on me, steady and dark in the yellow light. "The farmer's market," I said. "You remember." It wasn't a question. I knew she remembered. Some moments announce themselves as significant even before you know why, and that one had been loud. "I remember," she said. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you were anyone's mother or anyone's anything. You were just a woman at a table who knew exactly which honey she wanted. And I thought..." I stopped. Started again. "I thought, whoever she is the most certain person I have ever seen in a grocery context. And then I drove home and I thought about it for 6 weeks. And then I walked into your house for dinner and understood that the universe has a very specific sense of humor." Nora made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something quieter. "I thought you were going to say something. That night." "I wasn't going to say something. You were my girlfriend's mother." "I know." A pause. "I told myself it was nothing. That I was reading into a coincidence. Were you?" She took a long time with that. Long enough that I watched her profile in the lamplight and thought about the wedding photograph and the stone wall and a Tuesday in the rain and every careful, practiced almost of the last 4 years. "No," she said finally. "I wasn't." The word landed in the room and stayed there. I felt my chest do something complicated and unhelpful. I looked back at the ceiling because looking at her while processing that felt like too many things at once. "The wedding," I said. "By the stone wall." "Yes." "I thought I imagined that. You didn't." "And when you came to my apartment, after the divorce." "Quinn, I need to just..." I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed. Not toward her, just upright, because the ceiling wasn't working anymore, and I needed a different relationship with gravity. "I need to say all of it, or I'm going to lose my nerve and spend another year not saying it." I looked at her. "I think I married Diane because I needed to close a door. and I thought if I built enough life on the other side of it, the door would stop existing, and it didn't. It was always there. Every Sunday dinner, every Christmas, every time you handed me something in the kitchen and our hands overlapped by half a second. Nora had sat up too now, slowly, mirror of me, both of us on the edges of our respective beds, with the yellow lamp between us. Her expression was the one from the photograph, the one I had spent a year trying to name, and I could name it now. I could name it because I felt the same thing on my own face. I owed Diane a conversation, I said. A real one. Not the version I gave her when we divorced, where I said I wasn't sure I'd ever been fully present. The complete version, which is harder and more specific, and the one I've been avoiding because saying it out loud makes it real. Yes, Nora said. It does. I'm not saying any of this to make something happen tonight, I said. I want to be. I stopped. Reorganized. I want you to know that I'm aware this is not a small thing, that there are people attached to it, that I'm not 22 and operating without understanding the weight of what I'm sitting here telling you. I know how old you are, Quinn. Does that bother you? She looked at me for a long moment. Does it bother you? I thought about it honestly. About what the 20 years between us actually meant in the room we were currently in, as opposed to what it looked like from the outside. What I found, when I looked at it directly, was that it had never been the thing that gave me pause. The thing that gave me pause had always been the geometry of it, the position, the timing, the names attached, never the distance in years. No, I said, it doesn't. She nodded slowly, not surprised. What does bother you? That I don't know what you want, I said. I've just told you a significant amount of truth, and I'm sitting here with no idea if any of it lands anywhere useful for you, or if this is a snowstorm and a bottle of wine, and a situation that will look entirely different in the morning when the road is clear. Nora stood up. She crossed the 8 feet between the beds, not quickly, and sat down on the edge of mine. Not close, just closer. The mattress shifting slightly under her weight. She looked at me at this new distance, which was different from the distance across the room in a way I felt in my throat. It doesn't look different in the morning, she said quietly. I've had 4 years of mornings. Outside, the last of the snow was settling. Inside, the lamp threw its yellow circle and held us in it. And Nora was close enough that I could see the specific gray at her temple and the particular way she was looking at me, steady and decided and completely without performance. And I understood that she had been decided for a long time. Okay, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. Okay, she said back. Neither of us moved, not yet. The night had more patience than we did, and we were both, in our different ways, people who understood that the right moment is worth arriving at slowly. We stayed there on the edge of the bed with the lamp on, and the snow stopped and the town quiet around us. And we did not rush toward anything, because what was between us had waited 4 years, and it knew how to wait a little longer. But it was done waiting. We both knew that now. She was close enough that I could see the small scar above her left eyebrow that I had noticed years ago and never asked about. Close enough that the yellow lamp caught the silver in her hair and made it look like something deliberate, something chosen. The mattress held us both, and the room held the night, and I was 30 years old sitting on the edge of a bed in an inn in Vermont, thinking about how the entire shape of the last 4 years looked completely different from this angle, like one of those pictures that is 2 things at once. And once you see the second thing, you cannot find the first one again. Can I tell you what I remember most? I said. She waited. The dishes. That Christmas. I watched her face. We weren't talking about anything important. You handed me a glass and our fingers overlapped and you said I was good for her. And I said thank you and put the glass away. And I drove home that night. And I sat in the parking garage of our building for 11 minutes because I needed to stop feeling whatever I was feeling, before I went upstairs to your daughter. Nora closed her eyes briefly, opened them. I stood at that sink for a long time after you left the kitchen, she said. Diane came in and asked if I was okay, and I said the wine had caught up with me. Had it? No. Something about hearing it from her side. The same moment, the same weight, carried separately for years in different directions, undid something in me that had been held very carefully for a very long time. Not dramatically. It didn't feel like breaking. It felt like setting something down that I had forgotten I was carrying. I have a question, I said, and it is going to sound strange given everything we just said to each other. Ask it. Are you scared? She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, she said. Are you? Extremely. Good, she said. I'd be more worried if you weren't. I laughed, a real one, the kind that comes from relief rather than humor. And she smiled at the laugh, that particular smile that had been doing damage to my composure since a farmer's market in Portland 4 years ago. The smile that was small and specific and felt like being led into a room most people didn't get access to. I had missed it, I realized. In the years since the divorce, in the absence of Sunday dinners and family Christmases, I had missed that smile with a precision I hadn't allowed myself to examine. I keep thinking about Diane, I said. So do I. Not because I know what I feel. I'm not confused about that anymore. I looked at my hands. But she deserves the real version of why the marriage was what it was. She's been carrying a story where she wasn't enough, and that's not the true story. And she should have the true one even if it's harder. Yes, Nora said. She should. That has to happen before anything else. I know. She said it without hesitation, which told me she had thought about this too, had mapped the ethics of it the way she mapped buildings, with attention to what was load-bearing and what would crack under pressure. Quinn. She said my name the way she always said it, like it meant something specific in her vocabulary that it didn't mean anywhere else. I have spent 4 years being very careful, being appropriate, being exactly what I was supposed to be in the exact position I was supposed to occupy. She paused. I'm tired of being careful. I looked at her. The lamp. The snow quiet outside. The scar above her eyebrow. The 4 years between us that were also, somehow, this room, this night, this 8 feet that had become no feet. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Slowly. The way you do something you have imagined and want to get right. My fingers grazed her jaw, and she went very still, not pulling away, just absorbing it, her eyes on mine. Nora, I said. Yes, she said, not answering a question. Just yes. I leaned in and kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not the kind that exists in movies where the music swells and the camera pulls back. It was quiet and careful and completely certain, her hand coming up to rest against my face, warm and steady, the way she did everything. It lasted long enough to be real, and ended with both of us staying close, foreheads nearly touching, neither pulling back into the ordinary distance. This is what I had been carrying. Not a feeling I had invented or inflated or misread through the distorted lens of proximity and family dinners. This, the specific gravity of her, the way the room rearranged itself around the fact of her being close, was real, and had always been real, and had been waiting, with extraordinary patience, for this exact in this exact snowstorm in this exact November. She pulled back just enough to look at me. Her hand was still against my face. Her expression was something I had never seen on her before. Not the composed, measured Nora of 4 years of Sundays, but something younger and less defended. Something that looked like the first honest breath after a long time of controlled breathing. Hi, she said. I laughed. Couldn't help it. Hi. She smiled, the real one, the full one, the one she rationed. And I thought about every moment I had filed incorrectly, every glance I had mislabeled, every kitchen and hallway and stone wall where something true had happened, and I had walked away from it with my hands in my pockets and my face arranged into the expression of a person who felt nothing particular. We talked after. For a long time, the way you talk when something has been said that changes the acoustics of the room. About small things mostly, which is what you do when the large things have been handled and you are learning the new shape of each other. She told me about the building she was designing in Seattle. I told her about the bookshop I had started volunteering at on Saturday mornings. She told me she had read every book I'd ever mentioned at Sunday dinners. I told her I still had the honey, the buckwheat honey from the farmer's market that I had never actually finished. She stared at me. I said, I knew. At some point the lamp was still on, and her eyes were closed and she was asleep on top of the covers with the particular stillness of someone who had finally put something down. I watched her for a moment in the yellow light, this woman who had shown up at my door in the rain and left chocolate on my counter and driven 40 minutes on a Tuesday and carried 4 years of careful quiet. And I felt something so simple, it almost didn't have a name. I turned off the lamp. I lay back on my own pillow in the dark and listened to the inn settle around us and thought about Diane, who deserved the truth, and about the road that would be clear by morning, and about all the things that came next that were not simple and would require honesty I had been practicing toward for a year. But the thing I fell asleep thinking about was the honey, still in my cabinet, dark and buckwheat, and bought without tasting by a 26-year-old in a parking garage who had understood something true before she had the language for it. I had kept it without knowing why. Now I knew. The road was clear by 8 in the morning. I know this because I was awake at 7:30, sitting on the edge of my bed in the gray winter light, watching the snow outside the window doing nothing, just sitting there, finished, the storm completely spent. Nora was still asleep. I had been awake for 40 minutes by then, not anxiously. Just present in the specific way you are present after a night that changes the floor plan of things. I got dressed quietly. I went downstairs and had coffee in the inn's small breakfast room, alone except for the woman with the reading glasses who told me the plows had come through at 6 and the pass road was open. I texted the cabin. Margaret replied immediately, as if she had been awake since 5, which she probably had. Road's clear. Everyone's here. Diane arrived last night. Then, after a pause, "Everything all right?" I said yes. She sent a thumbs up. Margaret communicated exclusively in declarative sentences and single emoji, which I had always found deeply comforting. I sat with my coffee and thought about Diane. Not with dread, exactly. With the particular seriousness of someone who understands that a thing they have been avoiding is now directly in the path, and the only option is to walk toward it honestly. I had given Diane a version of the truth when we divorced. The version where I said I had never been fully present, that it wasn't her, that the marriage had been built on something real, but incomplete. All of that was true. None of it was complete. The complete version had a name in it. Had a farmer's market and a stone wall and a Tuesday in the rain. Diane deserved the complete version, not because it would be easier for her. It wouldn't. But because she was a person who had spent a year carrying a story where she was somehow insufficient, and that story was wrong. And wrong stories are their own kind of damage. Nora came downstairs at 8:15. She had coffee. She sat across from me at the small table and looked at me in the morning light with the calm assessment of someone checking whether the night had changed anything in the daylight. "Still okay?" she said. "Still okay?" I said. "You?" "Yes." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Diane's at the cabin." "I know," Margaret texted. A pause. "Quinn, I'm going to talk to her," I said. "Today, before anything else, before any conversation about what comes next for us." I'm going to talk to her. Nora nodded. She did not look relieved exactly, more like confirmed. Like this was the answer she had expected and had needed to hear anyway. I'll stay out of it, she said. Whatever you need to say it without me in the room. I know. And Quinn. She waited until I looked at her. Be kind, but be honest. She can handle the truth. She's handled harder things. I thought about Diane, her particular resilience, the way she processed difficulty with tea and practicality and a brief cry followed by forward motion. Nora was right. Diane could handle it. What she could not handle, what no one should have to handle, was a sanitized version that left her filling in the gaps with the wrong answers for the rest of her life. We checked out at 9. The drive to the cabin took 40 minutes on roads that were white at the edges and clear in the middle. The sky the particular blue that only exists after heavy snow, everything sharp and clean and rearranged. Nora drove her car. I drove mine. We did not discuss this. It was simply the right choreography, arriving separately, giving the morning its appropriate shape. The cabin was a large A-frame set back from a frozen lake, smoke coming from the chimney, Margaret's truck in the drive alongside 2 others. I sat in my car for 2 minutes after I parked, not stalling, just finishing the thought I had been building since the breakfast table, the specific, honest shape of what I needed to say and how to say it without making Diane the audience for my confession. This was not about me finally being honest for my own relief. This was about giving her the true story, so she could put it down and move forward with accurate information about her own life. She was in the kitchen when I came in. Of course she was. Diane cooked when she was processing things, had always cooked. It was one of the most consistent things about her. She was making something with apples. She looked up when I came in, and her face did the thing it always did. Warm, open, no armor. And then she registered something in my expression, and the warmth sharpened into attention. You look like you need to talk, she said. I do, I said, if you're willing. She turned off the burner. She wiped her hands on a dish towel. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me with the direct, clear-eyed patience that had always been one of her best qualities. The quality that had made me feel safe once and that I had mistaken for too long for the whole of what I needed. I sat across from her. I took a breath. And I told her the truth, not cruelly, not in the dramatic confessional mode of someone unburdening themselves at another person's expense, but carefully and completely. The farmer's market, the dinner, the 4 years of Sunday afternoons. The way I had built a marriage in good faith with genuine affection, and had also, simultaneously, never been able to fully close a door I should have examined more honestly before walking through the one that led to her. Diane listened the way her mother listened, completely, without interrupting. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet except for the fire and the lake outside doing nothing under its ice. She looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I knew something was missing, she said. I spent a year thinking it was something wrong with me. It was never you, I said. I need you to have that clearly. Nothing about you was the reason. I know that now. She said it slowly, testing its weight. It doesn't make it simple. No, I said. It doesn't. She was quiet again. Then, my mother. Not a question, not an accusation. Just the 2 words, landing in the room and asking to be confirmed. Yes, I said. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet but steady. For how long? Since before I knew who she was. Before I knew she was yours. Something moved across her face, complicated and layered, the kind of expression that contains several contradictory feelings at once. Then she laughed. Short, a little broken, but real. Of course, she said. Of course it was. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. Does she know? Yes, last night. Diane nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the frozen lake, the bright, impossible blue sky. I waited. I owed her the silence, as much of it as she needed, without rushing her toward the version of this that would be easier for me to sit across from. Quinn, she said finally, I'm not going to tell you it's fine. It's not fine right now. It might be fine eventually. She looked back at me. But I need you to know that I am more angry about the 4 years of not knowing than I am about whatever happens next. That's fair, I said. That's completely fair. You should have known yourself better, she said, not unkindly, the way a person states a fact. Yes, I said, I should have. She stood up. She turned the burner back on. She picked up the wooden spoon and looked at the apples like she was deciding what to do with them. Then she said, without turning around, She's going to drive you insane, you know. She has an opinion about everything. I sat very still. I know. She'll reorganize your bookshelves. She can try. Diane made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something in the exact middle. She stirred the apples. I sat at her kitchen table in a cabin in Vermont and loved her for exactly what she was, good and direct and generous, even in the moments when she had every right not to be. Give me some time, she said. As much as you need, I said. I got up. I put my hand briefly on her shoulder as I passed. She didn't pull away. And I walked out of the kitchen and into the rest of the day, which was cold and blue and entirely unresolved, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something I had actually earned the right to walk into. I found Nora by the lake. She had walked down while I was inside. I could see her footprints in the snow, the clean, deliberate line of them going from the cabin to the shore, the kind of path a person makes when they need to move, but don't need to go anywhere specific. She was standing at the edge of the dock, hands in her coat pockets, looking at the ice. The sky behind her was that impossible post-storm blue, and the lake was white and flat, and the whole scene had the quality of something that had been waiting to be painted for a long time. I walked down. My boots made noise in the packed snow, and she heard me coming but didn't turn, just waited, the way she always waited, without impatience. I stopped beside her. We stood looking at the ice together for a moment, the cold finding every gap in my jacket, the silence between us, the comfortable kind that had developed somewhere between a yellow lamp and a paper cup of wine. How did it go? She said. She was honest, I said. She was angry in the right way about the right things. She asked for time. Nora nodded slowly. That's Diane. She said you're going to reorganize my bookshelves. A pause. She's not wrong. I turned to look at her profile. The familiar line of it, the gray at her temple, the scar above her eyebrow I had not yet asked about. She was looking at the lake with an expression I could read now, the way you learn to read a landscape after you've walked through it in all kinds of weather. She was giving me space, holding herself at a careful distance from the outcome, because that was what she did. She arranged the logistics of other people's comfort without demanding anything for herself. Nora. She turned. Stop being careful, I said. Something shifted in her face, the composed, arranged surface of it giving way to the thing underneath, which was less defended and more real and entirely hers. She looked at me in the cold blue morning, and I looked back at her, and there was no yellow lamp this time, no paper cups, no snowstorm making decisions for us. There was just the lake and the sky and the two of us standing on a dock in Vermont in November, completely voluntary, completely clear-eyed, with no weather to blame it on. I stepped toward her. She didn't step back. I've thought about what I want to say, I said. I've been thinking about it since the breakfast table, and I had something prepared, something reasonable and measured about taking it slowly and being thoughtful about the people involved. I paused. And all of that is true. And I still mean all of it. But what I actually want to say, standing here right now, is that I have been in proximity to you for 4 years, and every single version of the life I tried to build in that time had a door I couldn't close, and your name was on the other side of it. She exhaled. A small breath, visible in the cold. I'm not asking you to have everything figured out, I said. I'm not asking you to know what this looks like in 6 months or a year. I'm just asking if you want to find out. With me. Starting from here. She looked at me for a long moment. The lake made no sound beneath its ice. The trees at the shoreline held their snow, and the sky held its impossible color, and Nora Callahan, 50 years old and certain about most things, took her hands out of her pockets and held my face in both of them, the way she had the night before. Warm and steady. Thumbs at my jaw. Her eyes moving over my face like she was reading something she had been waiting a long time to read, without pretending she wasn't. Quinn, she said. Yes. You kept the honey. I laughed. A real one, the kind that comes from the chest, and she smiled the full smile, the unrationed one, and then she kissed me in the cold morning air with the whole lake behind her, and it was different from last night, the way a decision is different from a discovery. Last night had been the door opening. This was walking through it. The kiss was brief and warm, and tasted like coffee and cold air, and 4 years of careful patience finally, completely exhausted. When we pulled back, her hands were still at my face, and my hands had found her coat lapels without my having decided to put them there, and we stayed in that small, close space looking at each other with the particular expression of people who have arrived somewhere after a long route and are still slightly amazed to be standing in it. The bookshelves, I said. For the record. They're organized by color, and I know that drives you insane. It's not a system, she said. It's an aesthetic choice dressed up as a system. Those are the same thing. They are absolutely not the same thing. See, I said, this is already going great. She laughed, low and real, and pulled me in by the lapels I was still holding, and I went, and we stood there on the dock in the cold with our foreheads together, and the lake spread out behind us, frozen and quiet, and waiting for spring. And I thought about a farmer's market, and a jar of buckwheat honey, and a woman who reached past me with complete certainty and knew exactly what she wanted. I had been 26 and holding the wrong jar. I had spent 4 years finding my way to the right one. The cabin behind us had smoke coming from the chimney, and Diane inside making something with apples, and Margaret somewhere telling someone something in declarative sentences. And the world was complicated and unresolved and would require patience and honesty, and probably several difficult conversations I had not yet had. None of that had disappeared. It was all still there, waiting in the reasonable adult daylight, demanding to be handled carefully and well. But the ice on the lake would break eventually. The road home was clear, and Nora's hands were warm against my face in the cold, and she was looking at me like I was something she had kept without knowing why, and had finally found the language for. I knew exactly how that felt. I had the honey to prove it. And that's Quinn and Nora's story. If you made it to the end, thank you. Genuinely. Drop in the comments the moment that got you most, I want to know. If you're new here, subscribe. There's more where this came from.